Hey there. My name is Mid-Mask. Nice to meet you. What's that? You want to hear about some underrated D&D features? That I can do.
Hi, welcome back to the Mid-Mask channel. The channel where I make Dungeons & Dragons content and hopefully get you to laugh. For every one laugh that I get closer to escaping. This video is all about 5 underrated D&D mechanics. I was reading through the Dungeon Master's Guide and I saw all these features, so I was like, wow, these are really cool. Nobody uses them. When I say nobody, obviously there is some people out there who use them. I'm sure to great effect. It's just that often I never hear about them, and in a lot of the games that I've played, I've never really gotten the chance to interact with them. So perhaps if you're like me, this video will help you to learn about them. It maybe gives you some ideas to change them around because some of them are a little strange or difficult to use. So let's get right into things with number 1, poisons. Poisons have always been an interest to me in D&D. I think they're really cool. The idea of it's really cool. The Poisoner's Kit exists, but it doesn't come up a whole lot. And when I came across the rules in the DMG, I was like, okay, let's take a look. Oh, that's 2,000, that's 1,000 gold pieces. These kind of prices and DCs required to harvest poison, that being a 20 on a nature check for any kind of poison, mind you, makes it so a lot of lower levels have a difficulty even using this feature. And a lot of the adventures I play on are around levels 1 to around 14. And a lot of these prices and DCs are something you won't really get good at until around the end of that adventure. Obviously, you might have some luck coming across a treasure hoard and getting a couple thousand coins, but you're really gonna waste like half of it on a 1-dose poison? So why not half the prices or half the DCs required, or just make them a variable depending upon if you're getting a poison from a snake, a spider, or a giant purple worm? Because getting poison from a small poisonous spider doesn't seem like it warrants a DC 20 check. And poisons are just interesting too because they can be used more than just making the person die over dinner. Poisons could be used to, apply paralysis, unconscious, or short-term madness, which would be very funny. So adding them into your game in different and unique ways by allowing the players to interact with it more with lower DCs and lower prices might be a lot of fun. So you should definitely try it if you feel like it. I know I will when I get the chance. Number 2. Madness is a feature in D&D I don't see a whole lot. Madness comes in many forms, that being short-term, long-term, and permanent. Short-term and long-term are a lot like the wild magic table, if you're familiar with that, where you roll a 100-sided dice, and whatever you roll dictates what effect occurs to you, the player, or the creature being affected by it. Perhaps they hallucinate, average madness stuff. Or perhaps you just go unconscious, fall over, or begin eating dirt. Permanent madness, on the other hand, while it can be inflicted to the creature, being afflicted by it, is more of a character flaw. It even says this directly in the Dungeon Master's Guide, where it is more of a character flaw than a, detriment to your character. Obviously, you can play it up to be a detriment, especially if you see or hear things that aren't there, that can mess with perception checks and so on. But I think permanent madness is actually just a great way to mark how far you've come in an adventure, or perhaps to cover a character arc. Madness is a great tool to use in a lot of situations, and especially when you follow it up with number 3. Number 3 is the Sanity stat. Another optional rule I don't hear about at all. I'm sure there's people who use the Sanity stat out there, but let me tell you about it. It's very interesting. Sanity, unlike, strength, charisma, wisdom, intelligence, is a stat that does not level up through the ability score improvements that you get as a class. Instead, you gain or lose it depending upon what you're doing in your adventure. You'll lose sanity if you're doing or reading things that are very alien to you, very disturbing, very graphic, and so on. And you might gain sanity if you are having a nice time at the tavern, or perhaps you are on a long adventure-free vacation. But if your sanity decreases too much, you can start inflicting madness onto your PCs or perhaps your NPCs. It's a really great thing to add into your game, especially if you're dealing more with like terror-like things, aliens, mind flayers, the Amnesia Dark Descent monster. It's a great way to add a lot of depth to your game without hindering the players too much. It's that nice little thin layer of difficulty you can just put on top of whatever else you're doing in your adventure. Number 4. Another feature I really like to expand upon in my own time is the Xanathar's Guide to Everything, making your own magic items. At this point, the system I use is a wildly different version than what this book says, but let me elaborate on what the guide says, and then I'll tell you a little bit of what I do to alleviate some of the frustrations that might come with the default system. Making your own magic items can be a cool process to go through. You can kind of customize what you're making, or if you want one very specific item, you can go ahead and do it yourself. Although, the guide mentions it requires a lot of in-game time, a lot of gold, lots and lots of gold. Also, rare materials that you have to spend entire adventures on. Now obviously, if you want to go on an adventure to get an item, then you can craft the other item that you want. That's cool. I actually think that's a great idea. Getting a dragon tooth to craft a cool dagger to go kill something else way over there is a thematically very cool idea. But say you want an item that's very small, but now it's a frustration that you have to go all the way over here to an icy mountain to kill an ice giant just to make a ring of water walking. For most players, it'd be easier just to ignore the item crafting system altogether and go on an adventure to find it, or just buy one from an enchanter. Or worst case scenario, have an enchanter make one and then go do something else that is more beneficial to your time. With all these kind of interweaved problems, it can be just a frustration to use the system. So here's what I do. I like the idea of collecting materials to make your own items. So obviously, when you start off at level 1, you're not going to have too much of anything, and that's fine. But on your adventures, when players go across dungeons or mountains or whatever, they can collect materials along the way. Perhaps you can have the players keep track of this, or perhaps that it naturally accumulates over time. Perhaps if you go through an abandoned mine, you eventually pick up some iron ore at the end that you can keep in your bag of holding. And when you come back to a village, you can craft your own dagger, which is the basis to all your item crafting needs. And specifically going back to magic items here, eventually, maybe on your 5th adventure or so, you come across a bunch of emeralds in a goblin chest. These emeralds are enchanted, and when you slot them into your dagger, they now have a acid damage effect. You are passively able to craft your own items that are interesting to you, the player, and also very unique to you, but it doesn't require a lot of time, and it's just more interweaved with your experience. Rather than having this whole thing you have to go do just to do an item, it's kind of all mixed together very homogeneously. I hope this is making sense so far, but if it doesn't, feel free to leave a comment and I will try to elaborate a little more. Number 5. The Honor Stat. The Honor Stat is probably one you have heard of before, but maybe never used. I've heard of the Honor Stat on occasion, especially when I know there are players who like the more political roleplay side of things of D&D, and fantasy politics and all that, which I make fun of a lot on this channel, but it can be very interesting. And the Honor Stat adds to that interest. The Honor Stat is a lot like the Charisma Stat, where you use it for social situations. But very specific social situations, I should say. Say you're at a fancy dinner party and you're trying to figure out the etiquette. The etiquette would be an honor check. Or perhaps you're trying to have a tense situation about if you're upholding the right honor codes or ethical codes or what have you. That would also be an honor check. I should also mention, a lot like Sanity, because these two are right next to each other in the DMG, is that it is also a stat that you don't level up using your normal ability score improvements. It is something that you gain or lose depending upon your actions within the adventure. So say your game has lots of politics and lots of social interactions, you want to keep track of how players are handling that. The Honor Stat is a great way to keep track of it. It can have a lot of fun implications too. Say all your players lose their honor and they have to go hunt a specific bald guy to go get it back. That could lead to a very fun adventure where maybe the reward isn't material and is more or less your whole party's reputation. That's all from me. I hope this was helpful to you. I hope it was insightful. I will see you again in the next video. Adios.